Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of In Grok We Trust. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about something called confirmation bias. You may have heard of that before or not, but you're definitely a victim of it, as are we all. And yes, before I get to that though, I would like to encourage you to please, while you're listening, type some comments in the comment section. You can keep it all in one comment and then just hit enter at the end if you like. But I really do encourage you to do that, because part of the reason why I've started this new format of YouTubing in a kind of podcast style is that I would like to interact with you guys on real issues and important issues, things that I feel are important to talk about, and I don't want it to be a one-end conversation, you know? So please do comment, tell me what you think. If you have anything to add to what I've said, do that and I will definitely reply. I also intend on collecting comments and answering you guys in a separate series. So yes, please do that. But okay, so straight to confirmation bias. What is it exactly? Confirmation bias is basically this little trick that our minds play on us that we're not aware of. A kind of psychological safety mechanism, you could call it, which is used to help us feel safer in a world that we don't fully understand. It's a pretty nasty trick, more subtle than I at first realized, but you can control it. At least I think I've managed to keep it under control most of the time. But before I get to that, let me explain how it works. So, as you grow from a child to an adult, you try to make sense of the world, right, as you go along. And along the way, you reach conclusions with varying degrees of importance in your life, from simple, arbitrary realizations to greater enlightening epiphanies, whatever they are. And through this, you develop a sort of unique set of paradigms, which you, of course, feel comfortable with, and you use them to then further interpret your experiences within the world in order to understand it further, right? Now, essentially, confirmation bias helps you to preserve your hard-earned paradigms. Your brain tends to filter out stimuli that you don't agree with, or at least stimuli that don't agree with the ideas you've become comfortable with, I should say. And inversely, it also tends to latch on to any small piece of data that helps to reinforce the ideas that you are comfortable with. So yeah, it's very sneaky. The mechanism can take different forms, from the more obvious, like, for example, only reading books that tell you what you want to hear, to the more subtle, sort of subconscious little decisions that you make as you're talking to a person about something, as you're arguing, or even if you're by yourself and you're daydreaming on the bus and you're sort of thinking about things, your mind will separate things, and if there's any thought that kind of goes against what you already believe, it disappears without you even realizing it. But any ideas that kind of reaffirm what you already believe, you put special attention, you give special attention to, and so that helps you to feel even safer. Now, those examples I chose specifically because they are examples of confirmation bias that I've readily noticed in myself in the past, which I now actively try to redress. But it's really tricky. I mean, let's take the books, for example. Yes, I've always chosen books that will probably confirm for me what I'm already tending to believe, or that help me, help immerse me deeper into that paradigm that I'm in. I remember when I called myself pagan, I read the historical fiction novel The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, and I absolutely loved it. I actually do think it's still a really good fantasy book, one of many King Arthur stories out there. But I also ate up any New Age nonsense I could find in the library. And why not, right? That was my interest at the time. The study of the old ways renewed, and all that sort of thing. But now there's two things to be noted here. The more obvious is that I only read that kind of thing. And the more subtle is that my brain, a remarkable masterpiece of evolution, nevertheless processed all of that and made complete sense of it. It's like it took only a few basic assumptions on my part, assumptions about the nature of reality that had no validity beyond the fact that I liked them, for me to then construct a diverse understanding of the way the universe works through the ideas and extrapolations of other people who think in the same way. So of course, you might be thinking at this point, yes, but isn't that natural? Don't we all just choose books or other media that we like? What should we do then? Should we choose things that we don't like? And what I say to that is that whether you like the books or not should not be the issue. I mean, if you are really interested in getting to the truth of a matter, whether it be the nature of reality or the best method of growing bonsai trees or whatever it is, you should be reading a variety of authors and getting a variety of opinions, most especially opposing ones, and then you can probably make an informed decision. And then there are the more subtle examples I mentioned, our own thought processes as we daydream on a bus, or as we are talking to a friend or arguing about something. In either case, whether you're having ideas suggested to you by another person, or having them generated sort of by your own perception of the world as you move along in it, we subconsciously discard pieces of information that don't agree with our established paradigms, in much the same way as while you're reading a book or an article, if you don't like what you're reading, you generally discard it. And the question is, how can you deal with that? Because that's happening on a level that you're really not aware of, especially the part where you're daydreaming on a bus and your thoughts are you're just thinking, right? And you can't really decide what to think about. And the only thing that you really can do there is to pay attention. It's a mindset that takes practice. You can, play the devil's advocate in your own head sometimes. Disagree with something that you... Just try it. Try disagreeing with something that you've established already as true and see what happens, And if you're talking to somebody, don't just blab out the first thing that comes to your head because that's what you believe. And, you should question yourself all the time and only say things, claim things if you are very, very, very sure you have fully processed all the angles, question the sources, where did that information come from, and don't just accept anything as fact, especially in this age where people share Facebook posts without even reading the article. They just like the title and so they share it, often making a fool of themselves because of the content of the article. So yeah, don't be that person. I've found that being truly objective and reaching unbiased conclusions is really difficult. I mean, most of the time you can't even detect your own bias, as I said now. And also, at first, keeping a third eye on your own thoughts can be really tiring. But for anyone who's interested in the truth, it's really absolutely necessary to try and do it. To stay vigilant and to not trust your own mind even, or at least only as far as you can throw it. Alright, so that's essentially it for this episode. I think it's going to be a shorter one compared to the first two, but that's okay. Please let me know, guys, what you think of that. As I said, I encourage you to leave comments. Tell me perhaps about examples of confirmation bias that you have noticed in your own life, maybe. Or if you didn't know about confirmation bias and now you do, maybe you realize how it does have an effect on your life and how it happens in your mind. So give me examples. An example that I can think of, something that really did change everything for me, was basically it was an unconscious thing, and I'm very glad it happened, because I used to be basically purely agnostic at one point, the kind of agnostic that says nobody knows anything for sure, and there could be a god or not, or the New Age spiritualists could be right. Nobody knows, and nobody has the right to tell the other person they're wrong because we really just don't know. And that does sound reasonable at first, but I was so attached to that way of thinking that I remember for a long time I ran into Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, a long time before I actually decided to read it. And I remember there were many times where I saw it and I was like, no, I'm not going to read that. You know, these atheists think they're so smart, but they don't know any more than anyone does. So I really avoided reading Richard Dawkins' book. And eventually, it's ironic actually, because the way I was still sort of a little bit spiritualist in those days. And I ended up seeing that book so many times that the very last time I saw it in a second-hand bookstore, I thought to myself, you know, oh, that must be a sign. I have to buy it. And it's so cheap anyway in the second-hand bookstore. So I ended up buying The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins because I thought it was a sign of seeing it so many times. But yeah, the point is that for so many years I avoided it because I just thought, you know, I was so happy with the way I thought about the world. And of course, buying this book and reading an opposing opinion completely changed all of the paradigms in my life. In fact, I think I first heard about confirmation bias in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And it is a very controversial title, The God Delusion, but believe me, if you haven't read that, you should definitely go and read it, because Richard Dawkins he's one of the, you know, you probably have heard of him. He's a famous atheist, and he is very reasonable and very, how do I say, methodical in his approach to thinking about these things. So even though the God delusion, it sounds quite, you know, like everybody's deluded into believing in gods, it's not quite like that in the book, and he goes through it very carefully. So I encourage you to go and read that, especially if you are a believer and disagree with it, right? Fight your confirmation bias and go and check it out. And of course, to all the atheists, I encourage you to go and read The Dawkins Delusion and see what you think of that. Yeah. Yeah, the point is to go and read opposing opinions and make up your own mind make an informed decision. But okay, thank you very much once again for listening to this. Everybody, please leave comments. Please like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already, if you're new, and let me know who you are so that I can, I just want to interact with you guys. Like I said earlier, I don't want this to be a one-way conversation. All right, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.